So I work at two different hospitals serving two different patient populations. One is located in the Upper East Side, where patients are more affluent, and the other in Washington Heights, where the patients are mostly immigrants and people of color. And even though these hospitals are in the same city, same state, same country in the United States, a wealthy, developed country, I saw how the virus and the pandemic disproportionately affected poor patients and people of color. Before I continue, today's video is sponsored by Bill and Melinda Gates. Every year, Bill and Melinda Gates publish an annual letter to offer perspective on social issues within the world and the ways in which we as a global community can make a change. In their 2021 annual letter, Bill and Melinda reflect on COVID-19 and discuss how we can prepare a healthier, more equal future for all by focusing on two key areas. Number one, creating a more equitable response for the pandemic. And number two, innovating and investing in future pandemic preparedness. In honor of this year's annual letter, I'll be sharing a little bit more about my pandemic experience as a whole and some of the lessons I've learned in the past year. Now back to the video. In each of the two hospitals, I had vastly different experiences when it came to patients having access to testing, having a physical space to be able to quarantine appropriately, having a job that allows patients to stay home. I had a significantly higher number of codes and deaths in Washington Heights Hospital compared to the Upper East Side Hospital. And honestly, the hospital in Upper East Side became pretty empty a few months into the pandemic because a lot of people left the city to go to their second homes or to stay with other family members in bigger houses out of state. While it's true that the global pandemic highlighted the differences between the rich and the poor, it also taught us that when it comes to health, there are no barriers. For all of us to move forward and recover from this means not just us and my family, but truly everyone around the world. It's not enough to just care about me, my family, my city, my country. There's an interesting quote from the newsletter that really stuck with me. In the past, global health was rarely used to mean the health of everyone everywhere. In practice, people in rich countries use this term to refer to health of people in non-rich countries. This past year, though, that changed. In 2020, global health went local. The artificial distinctions between rich countries and poor countries collapsed in the face of a virus that had no regard for borders or geography. Viruses like COVID-19 remind us that, for all our differences, everyone in this world is connected biologically by a microscopic network of germs and particles, and that, like it or not, we're all in this together. I think this part of the letter really put things into perspective. As an emergency medicine physician, global health is one of the really popular EM fellowships that many residents go into. And it makes sense. We see a little bit of everything, so it's natural that we would consider going to new countries without existing well-established healthcare system and try to figure out how we can best help the patients with given resources. I personally always thought of global health as helping other usually poorer countries, and it always held a separate mental space than the healthcare that we deal with here in America or other developed countries. I think this pandemic really changed all that. As long as there's immunity inequality anywhere in the world, meaning the wealthier countries are vaccinated, whereas the poorer countries don't have access to the vaccine, there will continue to be a new cluster of disease. And this isn't to say that we have to help them because if we don't, it will hurt us. Rather, this is to say that we're all in this together and we have to approach the problem with a global mindset. As Melinda said, COVID-19 anywhere is a threat to health everywhere. Another issue to think about as we recover from this pandemic is how we can prepare for the next one. I remember when we first started getting patients with COVID-like symptoms in the emergency department. At the time, testing was extremely limited, and we had to make so many phone calls to our hospital infectious disease specialist, to Department of Health, just to see if the patients were eligible for being tested. And most of the time in those early months, the answer was no. So I would send these patients home and tell them to quarantine if they were stable enough, without a clear answer as to whether they even have COVID. And I know it must have been really frustrating and anxiety-inducing for so many patients. One of the hopeful comments from Bill in the annual letter is the prospect that we will have mega diagnostic platforms in the future that are capable of testing as many as 20% of the world population every week. I think it's fair to say that we were all pretty surprised by how big of a deal COVID-19 became in 2020. I still remember reading about it in newspapers in January and February, thinking that it was someone else's problem. It's inevitable that we will come across another pandemic in the future, but it's hard to predict exactly when and what pathogen it's going to be from. I think one of the most valuable lessons we learned from this pandemic is knowing what kind of scientific tools and biotechnology we need to develop to better fight and contain the next novel disease. The pandemic took away a lot from all of us, but it also taught us some really great lessons. The pandemic shined a spotlight on pre-existing social and economic inequalities, but it also gave us a roadmap of how we can direct our investments and innovations to make sure that our future new diseases do not harm us the way this one did. We have an opportunity to come out of this pandemic and rebuild our economy and future with these issues in mind. If you're interested in learning more, including more ways to prevent and better manage the next pandemic, you can head over to gatesletter.com to read Bill and Melinda Gates' annual letter about how we can turn the lessons of this pandemic into a healthier and more equal future for all of us globally. That's all for today. Thanks for watching, and see you guys in the next video. Bye!